Help me, am I making sense? All right, so now let's go with this, right? So over here, the next page it starts with the definition 4, right? And it's talk about contradictories. Now, it sounds very technical. It's not that technical, right? So two positions are contradictory if they both cannot be true and cannot both be false, right? So that's what contradictories are. What it says is, right, in the contradictories, phi and psi, right, cannot both be true and cannot both be false. That's all it's saying, simply. If we are using a formal system, if O represents some logical model with model theoretic semantics to establish semantically valid relationships for square of opposition, simply based, if O is a model, where it's trying to establish some sort of relationship between some positions, right, then contradictories in that model would be where two claims that are exact opposites. And what the square of opposition here means, that it's that diagram here, this one. That's what it is. So this formula is phi and psi cannot both be true and phi and psi cannot both be false. That's what it's saying simply. Subject must hold to either that subject believes God exists or that subject does not believe God exists by principle of bivalence, in that it is the case that S believes God exists is true, or it is not the case that S believes God exists is true, or logically expressed as BSD and BSG, right? Meaning that it is always true that S either believes in God or does not believe in God. However, cannot rationally believe both that God exists and God does not exist at the same time. So what Steve is trying to say here is, right, that the subject either believes that God exists or does not believe that God exists. And then also says that a rational subject cannot believe that both that God exists and God does not exist. So he's trying to treat theism and atheism as they behave like an either or pair, right? Which is not. That's where there's this wrong positioning of things opposite each other, right? He's given a standard definition of contradictories to us, right? That two positions cannot both be true and cannot both be false. So far, that's fine, right? But then he slides from the proposition itself to a person's belief about the proposition. That's not how it works. That part is about reality. Again, beliefs, how can you test the model of beliefs based on the reality, whether God exists or not exists, or whether something's true or false? Doesn't relate to it at all. What is in reality or not in reality may affect it or not, but when there's something like does God exist or not exist, right? In reality, doesn't matter. The definitions are definitions. They're descriptive, right? Yeah, they're descriptive, not prescriptive. They're describing something. They're describing a situation or a model. They're not talking about the reality. Steve is trying to barge in reality in and smash it with these definitions. Going back, so the real contradictory of, a subject believes God exists is not subject believes God does not exist. The real contradictory is subject does not believe God exists. These are contradictories. The first one and the third one. And likewise, the contradictory of subject believes God does not exist, this one, is subject does not believe God does not exist, this one. 1 and 3, 2 and 4, these are the contradictories. So what that means is that strong atheism and theism are not contradictories here. They are contraries. Right? There's a difference between contradictories and contraries. They cannot both be true, but they can both be false together. That's what being contrary is. And that's what we will see when we come here in definition 5, of the paper, right? If I go and scroll here, the contraries. When like the paper is trying to use this like Zord table, like the truth table here, right? The Boolean table for theism and atheism, that is the wrong truth pattern. Zord rules out both being false, but the agnosticism is exactly the case where both beliefs are absent or not absent, suspended. So the paper has mixed up the contradictory propositions with contrary belief states. Propositions and beliefs. Confused. And once you get a hang of this language, this language here, it becomes very easy to understand. And that's what I wanted to help people understand. I don't want people to get intimidated by the symbolism here and the logical symbolism here. I want people to understand what is actually going on. So you can go back to Steve and say, no, Steve, this is not right. We are now going to talk about definition 5, contraries. Over here, for phi and psi, if O is a model, right? What it's trying to say here is, contraries are when two positions, they cannot be true, but they can both be false. A rational person can't hold both of them together. You can't believe that God exists and then God does not exist at the same time, right? Or can't hold the same propositions at the same time. But you can suspend either or can hold neither. Over here, what Steve is trying to say is that someone believing that God exists and someone believing God does not exist are contraries and can be represented by a Boolean NAND function, not and. That's what it means. The first one is, if both are true, then the combination is not allowed, right? If the first one is true, the second is false, it's allowed. If the first one is false, the second one is true, it's allowed. If both are false, then allowed. If either one of them is false, it's still true. But if both of them are true, that's false. So it's a not, he's trying to use the NAND logic table here. I don't know why you don't have to use it. In my opinion, there's no need of it. So what it's trying to say here is the theism and strong atheism are contraries. In plain English, that means that there are two competing strong answers. You can't consistently hold both at once, but you can hold neither or you can suspend them at the same time. And this table is just a formal way of saying not both. Simple as that. That's the first line is what you need to worry about. And the last one. Then the definition 6 is subcontrary. Subcontraries over here as it shows, and it's moving to lower positions in the square, the weak ones, right? These are called subcontraries. I'm repeating myself. That means that two weak non-belief positions can both be true together, but they cannot be false together. You can say it's sort of if you go back to the truth table, this one, if both are true, but they cannot be false together, yeah. So it's a subcontrary. So what it's saying here is, in the subcontrary, what it's trying to say, in this case, two weak positions are, the subject does not believe that God exists, and the subject does not believe that the God does not exist, right? Those are the two. And that's what Steve is saying. These are the two subcontraries that can be presented by an OR function. If both are true, then true. If one of them is true, and true. If any one of them is true, then it's true. If both of them are false, then false, right? So they both cannot be false together. So you can use an OR table for that. In the OR table, the logical thing, if any one of the positions are true, then it's true, right? If both are false, then false. It's simple. Then we go to definition 7, subalternations, right? So subalternation is a one-way implication. It's a one-way street, you can say, right? Stronger position automatically brings a weaker one with it. This tags along with it. You're coming with me. You can't go around. right? So if someone believes God exists, then they also count as someone who does not believe God does not exist, right? And if someone believes God does not exist, then they also count as someone who does not believe God exists. The table over here, right? It's just that's what it's saying. If both are true, then true. If one of them is false, false. If the first one is true and the second one is false, then it's false. If the first one is false and any one of them is... this one is a bit... Okay, hold on. So yeah, so if the first one is true, then the second is true, the implication works. If the first one is true and the second one is false, the implication fails. If the first one is false and this implication is still counted as true. If the first one is false, it is still counted as true in formal logic. The reverse is not true, right? If someone believes God exists, that they also count as someone who does not believe God does not exist. But it's not the other way around. As someone who does not believe God does not exist does not mean that they will believe God exists. That is not true, right? So that's what it's talking about. Again, and if someone believes God does not exist, that then they can also count as someone who does not believe God exists, but it's not the other way around. Someone who does not believe God exists is not going to be someone who believes God does not exist. Right? It doesn't go backwards. It just goes forwards. Right? So a person can fail to believe God exists without positively believing God does not exist. This is a more elaborate square of opposition, machinery. That's what it's happening. Contrary, subcontraries, subalternation, and the diagram itself. And I'm going to be fair here. It's fair where it's fair, yeah? The square properly understood is not it's not like the focus of my critique, right? Or the square actually is helping my critique over here. Because the square is itself encoding difference, hierarchy, and overlap. It's not collapsing. Theism is on one side, atheism on the other. The lower row is the weak pair, weak atheism, weak theism, right? And agnosticism is treated as a conjunction of the two lower positions. So if I go here, there it is, right? Theism on one side, atheism on another, and then you have weak theism and then weak atheism, right? So this is what it is. And the agnosticism is treated, in the conjunction of the lower positions, this one. So it's talking about difference in hierarchy and overlap. It's not talking about collapse anywhere. It's not collapsing on itself. So the downward arrows over here are one-way implication, which are subalterations, right? It's implication, not identity. So if theism implies weak theism, that means every theist satisfies the weak theist condition. That does not mean that every weak theist is a theist. And I think so that's where Steve got it wrong. A downward arrow is not an equal to sign. So the paper itself is drawing a picture in which the lower terms are broader than the upper terms. These terms are very specific. These are the broader terms. Right? Like the top, theism and atheism, they are specific ones. The bottom ones, weak theism, weak atheism, agnosticism, these are the broader ones. These are broader. Yeah. So there's also like a technical sloppiness over here in the paper, yeah. The definitions of contrary, subcontrary are formalized, and subalternation is defined in terms of one-way implication, right? But at points, the prose blurs which pair is standing in which relation. There's a looseness between formal labels and the informal talk. That's what I discovered a lot. it's not fatal to the argument, but it's like it contributes to the sense that formula, a formal model or presentation is being used for weight more than clarity. So yeah, so this whole the square thing is, you can say it's kind of a map. It shows which positions exclude each other, which positions imply broader ones, right? And where agnosticism sits. But even if a map overlaps, it's not a proof that places on the map are identical.